that humility to me, of just not thinking, one, that I'm going to be the one who screws it up. It's all about me saying it the right way. And two, that we don't kind of pigeonhole ourselves into one particular place or time or way or method or whatever of sharing the gospel with somebody. I think that if we can kind of do it with the freedom of a child of God, to go and just share our story and his story, ultimately, God's story, because that's what our stories are. I mean, they're God's stories. And so I think if we just kind of see it that way, I'm free, I'm God's child, I love him, he loves me, and he's given me a gospel to share. I want to go share, I want to tell people about it. It's good news. And so then that sort of frees me up to get out of my head a little bit, I guess, and then just to take the situations as they come. I guess that's sort of Paul's point. I became like, to those not under the law, I became like one not under the law, basically Gentiles, right? To those under the law, Jews, I became like one under the law. It's just, if I'm talking to Jews, if I'm talking to Gentiles, if I'm in Athens, if I'm in Jerusalem, I can humble myself to a place to be able to share the gospel.
Hey guys, welcome to the After Church Podcast, where we take what we hear on Sunday and we apply it to our lives on Monday. We're kind of wrapping up this section of 1 Corinthians 9, 10, and chapter 14 a little bit today. We're talking about sharing the gospel, what it means to share the gospel. And Paul had some words to share with us, to share with the Corinthians, and so he's going to share them with us today. We're going to talk about the difficulty it is in sharing our faith. We're going to talk about some of the key components of what we need to do as far as sharing our faith. Anyway, I think you'll appreciate the honesty and transparency in which we come at you with it today, because it is sometimes difficult to share faith. Anyway, Gary Thompson's going to be here. Kurt Peterson's going to be here. I'm your host, Trey Bailey, and we'll see you in the podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast.
Trey.
Gary.
Great to be here. Gary.
Kurt, Trey. Wait a minute. I said my own name in our shouting of names to each other.
Thing that we did.
That's what we do. So if anyone is listening, that is exactly what we do. Just shout our names out to get started. We are in our Messy Church series. We have been discussing 1 Corinthians, Paul's letter to the church at Corinth. And this week, we've kind of decided to take some different segments of different chapters. We've kind of been going chapter to chapter. And last week, we had a great conversation, really, about the food sacrificed to idols and what Paul, we made some
stumbling blocks,
some modern day applications, and real interested, really kind of just to hear if you had any feedback like from the congregation on that topic.
I had a little bit, not a lot. You always wonder what people are thinking, because everybody lands on one side or another on a lot of those topics.
Right.
Either thinking you should or you shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Right.
When you're preaching, you're preaching, but you're having that conversation in your mind. What's he think? What do they think? Oh, he's getting up and oh no, he's using the bathroom.
Yeah. See if he comes back in. I just saw them in the gas station getting a 6-pack the other day.
That's right.
Hey, looking at me funny.
He
What's
thinks
going
I'm
on?
talking to him. That's right.
He saw a lot of wives nudging their husbands and stuff. No, stop it.
I haven't had any negative feedback. Nothing that anybody's told me. Like you said, I'm sure there's you preach messages like that in the last couple of weeks, really, and I'm sure there's some that are like, I don't really agree with this part of that part, but I haven't heard anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are.
I will say, I forgot, one person did come up to me and said that they realized that they had been judging somebody,
Ooh,
which I thought was pretty big for them.
yeah.
And it wasn't really about any of the areas we talked about, but just that they had been judging them about an area of their life.
A personal conviction. They were like,
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have heard that. I've
Yeah.
heard that message was convicting. The
Yeah.
scripture
Right.
is convicting,
Right.
which it is. And I was like,
Right.
me too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's convicting to me. It is.
Well, kind of coming out of that last week, the whole stumbling block and really the emphasis being on unity, right? Like laying down
Right.
our liberty and
Yeah.
for the sake of unity. Paul continues, or we'll start at the end of chapter 9, because he kind of makes this shift about, he's talking about his liberty, right? And he's saying that in order to, he basically says, I can't help but preach the gospel. This is Paul the apostle. So he's like, I can't help but preach the gospel. I could get paid to do it. Like that would be right and appropriate, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually forego that liberty in order to not be a stumbling block and that kind of thing. And so then he transitions kind of into saying that though I am free, this is 9:19, and then we'll kind of get to some of these conversations in a minute. But he says, though I am free and I belong to no one, I have made myself a slave or a servant to all, to everyone, to win as many as possible. And so now in this kind of section, or the sections that we've pulled out today, particularly parts out of chapter 9, 10, and 14, we see this emphasis, at least to Paul, about the goodness of Christ, but that the gospel going forth, like to win the lost. He's talking about his own personal calling, but yet that's application to us, right? As disciples, we are also called to go and share the gospel. And so to win, I'm going to hear some phrases that we use, like win the lost, or to share the gospel, or witness to non-believers. These are kind of the church words for just telling somebody about who Jesus is.
Right.
And so we kind of boiled it down to 4 points. And I know at the East Campus, Scott Moore's going to be preaching the message, and at the South Campus, Mitchell Thompson's going to be preaching the message. So their points might be slightly different, but the way we'll take it today is that winning the lost takes humility, piety, unity, and intentionality. And so let's start with just some quick definitions. Kurt, like when we say humility, what do we mean by humility?
Mostly we just use those words because they all ended kind of the same. Really? They don't really mean anything. No, I'm just kidding. So, I do think these points are in here, and so they work out pretty well. Humility. When I think of humility, I always think of the C.S. Lewis quote that he makes in Mere Christianity, that it's not necessarily thinking less of yourself. It's just thinking of yourself less. It's having the ability to just sort of put yourself down, right? A lot like what Paul is describing about himself in chapter 9, to say, like, I don't use my rights as an apostle over and against you, or to be a stumbling block, or to earn, to get the money that I might deserve, or the whatever. But man, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. And he's just kind of like, man, I'll let go of everything else for that calling. So anyway, when I think of humility, that's what I think about. Just sort of a laying down of yourself, your pride, what you feel like you might deserve for the greater good and the greater calling that God has given us. In this case, to preach the gospel or share the gospel with maybe a non-believer.
Here's a scenario real quick then to weigh in if this makes sense to you. Would humility also be like when I go to share the gospel, sometimes I'll think I don't know it well enough, or I don't have all the right words.
Right.
I'm sure other people probably think that. That's thinking of yourself more than you're thinking about the gospel.
That can feel like it's humility because you're being self-abasing, right? Like, I'm not good enough. I'm not so. But really, that's still the same because you're saying I a lot in there.
Think of yourself less.
Right. Thinking of yourself less is the point. Like, just get yourself out of it. Like, it's not about you or even how well. Like, should we think about and kind of study and all that, like, to know how to share the gospel? Sure. But when it comes right down to it, sometimes it's just, you know what? This is God's work. This is God's calling. I'm going to trust him with it, and I'm going to do what he's called me to do. Forget about me and trust the Lord.
And maybe we'll get to intentionality. That might play into it in a minute. But so what do you mean by piety? I know you pinned some of these words. And that's a churchy word.
Yeah, it is a real churchy word, which I like. Sometimes you throw those little churchy words in there to give a conversation going.
What does this mean?
Piety, I think it's really an intentionality is going to be a word in a second, but kind of an intentional effort towards living your life for the Lord, in the Lord, morally and ethically. Basically, reverence. It's written. We got it written down here. Reverence and obedience to God is a great way to put it. Holiness, so to speak. We are called, 1 Peter tells us, be holy as your Father is holy. Jesus said the same thing. And so it's really, as we share the gospel and as we do any kind of ministry that we do, we're never going to compromise who we are as Christians and what we believe and how we actually live our lives. We're not going to share the gospel by doing sinful things.
Okay.
Right? We're not going to share the gospel by entering into the sins of the world. We can be in the world in a sense, and we'll probably talk about that here in a second, but at the same time, we stand on the convictions and the truth that we believe, and we're going to walk with Christ and all those things. So anyway, piety just means, it's really a Godwardness of life, right? It's a Godward in all that I do. So I even want to honor him, of course, with my words and my actions as I present the gospel to somebody. So.
Okay. And that in the context, sharing the gospel. So I've heard a story before, and I don't know these people, but that this lady was a former stripper. And so she would go into strip clubs and minister to, the ladies that were working there. I would not encourage a guy to do that, right? Like that sounds like a bad idea. That would be not pious in order to win the lost.
Not a great idea,
to win the lost. But in her case, that was probably an appropriate and good thing to do. It's not
Right.
It wasn't about her being pious. I mean, it wasn't about
Right.
someone else's piety, but she was being reverent and obedient to God in a context that we probably, you and I could
Yeah.
do that, right? So
Yeah, and there's like you can go into the bar and share the gospel with folks. If you're going in and getting drunk with them to do that,
right, okay,
you're probably missing something there, you know.
yeah,
But you can go and be with them and hang. It said all the time, Jesus hung out with all sorts of different sinful
Mhm.
people. Never that he engaged in those things with them, but
Mhm.
he loved them and he was friends with them and he spent time with them.
okay,
So there's a
that's
difference.
great. That was helpful
Yeah.
to
Right.
understand piety. So winning the loss when it comes to unity is important.
Yeah, it means not having churchy words like piety that nobody understands.
Stop being disunified.
No,
in your
it is.
churchy words.
It is. You know, Paul addresses this in 14, where he talks about having chaos in the church, people coming, unbelievers coming in your midst, not understanding what's going on there. But I also think it's personally too. There needs to be unity in what you're saying and how you're living.
Mhm.
Much like the first one, just that there just needs to be this common unity of thought and belief and action that we display. We try to display in our lives. We're not perfect, but also in our services as well.
Mhm.
That this unified message.
Integrity.
Yeah,
That's a good word
yeah.
too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then the last one is intentionality. I know this is a big one.
Mhm.
Yeah, this has been something that has been huge on mine, and I'm not. It's gonna. I don't have a handle on it. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm quick to share my weaknesses. This is something that I've been trying to make more of a strength in my life,
Mhm.
of being more and more intentional about sharing my faith with people, about inviting people to church and seeing where they're at spiritually. And when I read Acts, when I read about Paul, he did it everywhere he went. He'd go to a place, he'd go to the temple. All right, I'm going to tell you all about Jesus. Okay, some would listen, some wouldn't. Okay, you don't want any part of this? I'm going to go to somebody else. And keep going down, and just he was so intentional. And I think that we've got to understand that if we are going to win someone to Christ, if we're going to share our faith with someone, if they're going to place their faith in Jesus, that God does all that, but it's probably not going to happen without our intentionality.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I used to, there was some bumper sticker would be the wrong, like a sign or a billboard or something that said, share the gospel, and if you have to, use words.
Oh yeah.
Something
That's
to
an
that
old
account?
quote. Yeah.
Yeah.
From Francis of Assisi.
Share
That
the share the gospel.
That's who's been. I don't know.
Tribute
if you,
to?
Yeah,
Yeah.
tribute. Yeah. that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like share the gospel everywhere and in every or something like that.
If
and
you have to
when
use words.
necessary, use
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
To say again, integrity. Like
Right.
live in your life. Let your life should be a witness. The things that you're doing. I do think piety is part of it.
It is part of it. I was messing with it. It is. It is part of it.
But our words, then the intentionality too,
Right.
to go. I can expect also that people will just come to faith just because I'm nice,
Right.
just because I'm
Right.
good, or just because I'm
yeah.
pious. They need to hear it too,
Yes.
and they need to actually know who Jesus is and hear that come out of my mouth. So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, you were talking about being able to share our weaknesses, and I'll just say that this is always an area I might try that. Like I might try to just be nice to a lot of people and
And
hope that
they ask about it.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I know that
Yeah.
Scripture calls us to
Right.
like proclaim, not just
Right.
live, but to live it out. Yes, but then to actually say what we believe the gospel to be. So just if you could sum it up, like when Paul's talking about sharing the gospel, what is he saying? What does he mean sharing the gospel?
What does he mean by sharing the gospel?
Yeah, when
Or-
he says to win as many as possible, what is he saying or sharing, or what is the winning of the people?
Yeah, as people come to a saving knowledge of Jesus at the end of the day, right? That they actually know the love and the truth. I always kind of put those two, beside one another
Mhm.
because both are necessary. You got to know the love of Christ and the gospel and what that means. I think that's a big, huge part of
Right.
how we live our lives towards them.
Mhm.
And then also the truth. Again, that's the words. Like they don't know the truth just by our actions in love, but then got to know the truth of the actual content
Mhm.
of the gospel, or sort of the ethical application of the gospel. There's also the content of it,
Mhm.
who Jesus is and what he did for us, and
Mhm.
how he rose from the dead, and how he calls us into a new life, and all these things, right? So, man, it's like that's a big thing. That's a really big deal that doesn't often happen in 10 minutes with somebody.
Mhm.
Sometimes it might, and it does. But mostly it happens by doing life together,
Right.
and you're able to live that out and share life, and
Sure.
then over time be able to share that with them verbally as well. So.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the same things. I think it's me sharing that Jesus has saved me and the difference it's made in my life.
Mm.
And that's the avenue I try to take, that they need Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and they may not know it, but that's what the gospel is that we need Jesus. We can't
Yep.
be saved without him,
Mhm.
and so that's the angle I take. Just looking at my life, what he has done for me, I would like to see him do for you.
So you start kind of with your story. I was lost, now I'm found, and it's Jesus who did it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
so
that is
good.
a great way to start.
Yeah.
Is, hey, I'd love to tell you my story,
Mhm.
and that's something that I've been doing. Just say, can we go to lunch? I'd love to tell you my story, and then I say, tell me your story.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll even start with them. Hey, tell me your story.
Mhm.
They'll tell me your story. So can I tell you my story? And the good thing about that, it's very disarming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes when you're throwing out Bible verses and stuff, they're
Yeah.
backpedaling and
Mhm.
they're feeling like you're judging them, and
Just intimidating.
yeah, exactly. It's uncomfortable, but I think we want to hear each other's stories.
Mhm.
We love a good story.
Yeah, we do. We
Yeah.
want to hear stories.
And truthfully, your story is formed by the scriptures that you have read
Right,
and applied.
exactly. Yes.
So it's not like you're not using
No.
scripture; it's just in an indirect
Yeah.
kind of way, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. So intentionality is what we were talking about, and I think I'll start with this question. Then in our discussion questions is really how intentional are you with non-believers, and what does it look like to you? Because I mean, in our context, we're pastors, and
Right.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying that's not common to everybody to be intentional. We got to be intentional. But sometimes it feels like we really have to be intentional because we're kind of in a bubble a lot of the time. So
Right.
we have to do
Right. Yeah.
and go and be intentional. So you got stories or personal things that
I try to get where I feel like lost people are. And when the kids were growing up, it was easier through sports
Mm-hmm.
that you were just naturally, or their friends and their friends' family. It was natural. It was easier. As I've gotten older, I've had to be more intentional. And so I joined a gym and just went there and worked out and hung out with those guys and then formed some really good bonds. But I also think about just people you run into in just context. And instead of just running by, I'm just thinking that, you know what? This may be someone I could try to befriend and try to talk to or try to share my faith with and being in those contexts. But really just, I think part of the problem is that a lot of Christians don't hang out with lost people.
Yeah.
And I think you need to start thinking about hanging out with lost people. I mean, really, that's what Jesus did. He hung out with lost people,
Right.
Yep.
and they liked him.
right.
And I think they'll like you. And we're going to have to move past agreeing with what everybody does and just love people and be uncomfortable. And I think sometimes we are just uncomfortable in these circumstances. I won't hog this moment, but years ago, a guy from South Campus said, "Hey, I want you to come to my work party." He said, all my workers will be there. I think I told you. And then he said, and my family's going to be there. And he said, there's going to be a lot of drinking. And there was. And he said, I want you to come. And he walked around and introduced me to everyone that was there. He said, I want you to meet my pastor. And look, and some of them started coming to
Oh,
church.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, later. I mean, just, I don't know that we've retained them, but
Yeah.
they gave it a shot.
Right.
And
some probably didn't want to see you
yeah,
either. though,
exactly.
right?
It was uncomfortable. Something like this.
Hey, why'd you bring the pastor?
Hey,
You need to meet this guy. Gary, tell him that thing you were telling me Sunday.
yeah, but my whole point is, I could have been really uncomfortable and said, I don't know, that's not for me.
Right.
And that's okay if that's you, but I just think we're going to have to get to where we are in the room or in the area with lost people.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Be
Yeah.
where lost people are.
Right.
Yeah, I like the way you
Certainly, if
said
it
that.
doesn't make you stumble.
Right.
If
Yeah,
you don't-
absolutely. Yeah.
But if you have in a place where you should be able to handle that, then
Right.
it's easy to insulate
Right.
and go and retreat and hide from the lost. But you're right.
Right.
We got to be in those places.
I like the way you said that. Be in the room.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think you are right in the point you made about as pastors, we probably got to think a little bit differently than others about being intentional. I can easily get in the bubble, the church bubble, and it's
Right.
like well, it's kind of everything you do. You're just around mostly Christians. At times I've been intentional about, like, you go to the gym, going and playing basketball with folks that I knew weren't going to church, weren't Christian friends that I used to
Sure.
have or whoever. Or when I was doing youth ministry, I'd go to the schools a lot and try to just be there and get to know, like, my students' friends and same kind of thing. And then, we have a good bit of, especially like my wife's side of the family, not believers. And so I'm just trying to be intentional there. I think I'd probably do a better job of being intentional in just kind of moments in everyday life of people I don't even necessarily know than going like signing up for the gym. Like that's something I need to probably do better. Like just in more recent life, trying to be in consistent places where I know non-believers are. So that's just honest for me. Trying to make a more intentional effort in that regard. But I, over the years, I have, and I've shared the gospel with folks in the coffee shop that I just started talking to. We struck up conversation. It was great. Last year I got time to tell this whole story, but I got to know a guy who had moved into the area, was homeless, and just got to know him and spent a couple of months kind of getting to know him and taking him different places and things like that, and got to share it with him. Anyway, so that's been kind of neat. It's cool to see how God will, he'll bring you moments and opportunities when you're just trying to be obedient, I guess, in general. And as you're running across people, being willing to, if I get an opportunity to talk with this person about Jesus, I will. I think I do a better job with that, is what I'm saying, than like the consistent things in my life where I know I'm going to be in positions to share the gospel. Those are kind of things I'm still kind of looking for the ways to do that. I don't like working out, so I'm
You look good, though.
I know. Come on.
You look good.
I'm like, I don't want to go to the stupid gym.
You may not like it, but you do it.
I do want to jump in there, like when you talked about being in the coffee shops and stuff. Those are super important. I mean, because we're in those moments more than we are in the intentional moment. You can only go to the gym so many times.
Yeah. I do that. I try to do that intentionally.
And I'm barely hitting that.
I do go to the, bread and butter Starbucks. I try to go there and work every week, at least one day a week, usually like Thursday afternoons. You probably find me around town. And I do it, and I'm not, rarely, most of the time, I don't
have those
I don't get an opportunity. I don't have those interactions, but I have. And I honestly, I do it for that reason. I'm not trying to pat the back there. I'm just saying that's something I've tried to commit to the Lord to go. I don't want to just be in the bubble all the time. Just try to get out there in hopes that there are opportunities. There was a quick story. Young man, this was probably 2 years ago now. I was in local, just doing my work, whatever. He asked me a question about the internet. We started talking about something like, did I have internet or something? So we were talking, and then he started talking about a business he had that made T-shirts, and I think, had just made up Eastridge T-shirts. So that was a little bridge of conversation, what I did, and then anyway, I got to share the gospel with him, invited him to church. Said he was going to come. He never did, but we did get to talk about it, and I know I still think about him from time to time, and I'm kind of praying it's just a seed that was planted, and maybe wherever he is now, that somebody else has watered that seed.
That's right.
So, anyway.
Yeah. I feel like I'm in a lot of places where they're non-believers. Mine is more the personal intentionality of sharing the gospel with those people. Right. It's like I'm in the places, I'm going to try to be good, or, hope that wears off, or maybe they'll ask me a question, but I know I need to do work on just the intentionality personally of, making it known. Small quick story too. I was playing in a golf tournament a few weeks ago, and it was on a Sunday. So I'm sure the people were not thinking that I was anything to do with the church, or I'd have been in church, right? And certainly not a pastor, because then certainly you would have been in the church. But I wasn't, right? Like I said, I was at this golf tournament, and the guys were doing things they do at a golf tournament, right? They were swearing, and they were just swearing it out, and all. And finally, at some point, because this is what dudes do, they go, "Hey man, what are you doing?" I went, "Yeah, I'm a pastor." And they went, "You're a pastor?
Yeah. That's always.
Why didn't you tell me that at the beginning? Then I wouldn't talk like this." I'm like, "Well, I'm not God." Like.
And you're not like offending me, like I'm okay.
Right? Yeah. Oh, but
people think pastors are very delicate.
Oh yeah.
Generally, like we're very delicate.
Yeah. I can't tell you the story, Pastor. I'm like, probably heard it. You're not gonna
probably did it.
I know.
Probably,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so that's the intentional side of it, both being in the right places intentionally, and then being intentional about our words and actions. Are you going to?
Yeah, I want to talk about just being in those contexts on what you would do. What do you do? Like, I think, like, if you're listening, I think a lot of people, they want to share their faith. They don't know what to do.
Right. Yeah.
And so, what do you do? And I'm not going to give you like a bullet point of some stuff, but I would say a couple things. I'd say share your story. Tell your story, how God's changed your life.
Yep.
And then I would say, secondly, and there's a lot of debate on whether this is really evangelism or not. I'd invite them to church.
Mm-hmm.
I'd invite them to church, but somebody goes, it's weak. I'm like, I don't know.
It's something.
It's something. That's right.
I don't know. I think
go ahead.
I just think that there's more to it than we realize. We baptized a father and son this past Sunday. You know how they got there? Their next door neighbor invited them to church on Easter.
Mhm.
They came and their life is changed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it just, we underestimate the power of invite. That's what I've been telling our campus men. Don't underestimate the power of your invite. We always think they're going to come right away. If they don't, this is a rare case where they came, they invited and they came,
Yeah.
but you just never know what God's going to do. You never know what he's going to do.
Absolutely.
And if you're intentional about it, and so I think you share your story, invite them, don't give up. I think the one way that I've become more intentional is through my prayers.
Mhm. That's good.
Just listing these people's names and saying, God, because the scriptures say that if Jesus is lifted up, he'll draw all men unto him. And I pray for him to be lifted up in their life, that they're drawn to Christ.
That's good.
And that it's not me and it's not us. It's not. It's the power of the Holy Spirit. It's the gospel that they need Jesus. And so I would say those three things, just to tell your story, to invite, and to pray, man. Pray for them. Get on your knees and pray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Those are super good
The
points.
the invite, if people say it's not evangelism, it'd be like if someone said, "Hey, I'm ready for you to share the gospel. Will you tell me what Jesus is about?" And you go, "No, just come to church." Like they're like, "No, you
Right,
missed.
right.
That was the opportunity to share the gospel."
Right.
Yeah.
But rarely are people doing that.
No.
So the invite
Right.
is huge.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it's an open door,
just,
right?
yeah,
And
come with me. I'll sit with you. Whatever. Like,
Like I've said to people before, your testimony is not the gospel,
Correct.
but it's an open door
It
to
is.
share the gospel.
That's right.
An invite to church is not evangelism or the gospel, but it's an invite and it's an
Right.
open door. So anyway, I love your points. I think it's just, man, again, with the intentionality, that's Paul going, I'll be all things to all men.
Right.
If it means for this guy, I just want to invite him to church. Let's start there. If it means for this guy, I'm going to go sit and tell him my story. I'm going to start there. If it means this guy, I'm going to go to the ball field where my kids are playing and we're going to strike up conversation. Start there. A couple of years ago, we had Jackson and Hunter Hall shared at our campuses about some conversation techniques that were brilliant. So I was just going to add to this maybe a great place to start for some is just learning how to listen to people in conversation. As this works, best in. It can work in those short conversations where you just meet somebody. It works probably best in relationship conversations where you know these people and you're talking consistently. So if you're intentional with the way you listen to people and you hear them, like in natural conversation, they're probably going to bring up things from time to time that are meaningful to them because the conversations, and here's what Hunter and Jackson were sharing with us, that was so good for our church to hear these things. There's kind of like casual conversation that's just shooting the breeze, sports, weather, whatever. That happens all the time. There's meaningful conversation that then can move towards like things I care about, like the deeper stuff of my life. Maybe it is my family or it's my background, my story, or
Even work.
something.
Even
At
work,
work,
yeah.
something that I'm passionate, something that made me mad, something made me sad, whatever. Somebody loses a loved one. Like I'm not saying we manipulate, but I'm saying it is an opportunity to talk and there's meaningful conversation. Now you can actually move from there, hopefully, eventually, to spiritual conversation of, man, now we can talk about how God actually matters in this relationship and in this world that we're living in and in your life and in my life and in our stories as you move in conversation with those people. So all that to say, the only thing I'd add is just listen to people and be intentional with the way you have conversation with them because you never know what kind of door God's going to kind of squeak open for you to have a real meaningful or even spiritual conversation with somebody.
yeah, that's good, y'all.
You're moving on.
Kind of, but
Go
I'd
ahead,
be
go
glad if you. I was going to say I do appreciate you bringing up too the element that all of us can do in sharing the faith is to start by prayer. Like I'm probably not going to share my heart with someone if I don't care for them, and I don't know that I'm going to care for them until I'm praying for them consistently.
Right.
And then, or maybe it's not even them by name, but praying for opportunities. And then when the opportunity presents, I'm like, this is the one that the Lord's led to me. I have a kindred spirit. I feel like I need to share something or whatever. I love that to be praying for them because that will soften your heart. That will encourage you to share your faith. Do you want to continue with that one, or was there something about context? Okay. So that was the intentional part, but then there's also just sharing the gospel in different contexts. And we know in Acts, like you mentioned earlier, everywhere Paul went, depending on the context, he would share the gospel differently, right? Like when he was with the Jews, he went specifically to, here's the law, here's how Christ fulfills the law.
And
When
he'd meet them in the synagogues.
Right,
generally.
where they
He's
were.
going to them in the synagogues,
Or, there's the what's the place in Athens?
Athens, Areopagus,
The Areopagus.
Mars Hill. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard word to
thought
say.
about that.
Mars Hill. But there's like where all the thinkers were. So he went at them with a different perspective, right? A different context same gospel,
He quoted their poets.
but the context he
spoke their
met them
language, yeah.
where they were, and maybe just some areas in which you feel like that's been something, or some ideas in which we could share how you've shared the gospel in a different context, depending on the context.
Well, yeah, again, to me, it comes down to listening to people and knowing kind of where they are. You mentioned that, Gary, like we're really getting to know, like, where are you at with whatever you're believing, or, you know, kind of who you are in life right now, or where you are with God. I think about, and there was a guy specifically that I did get to share the gospel with last year. And he's a guy I've known for a long, long time. And I'd invited him to lunch a couple different times. We had went to lunch and just talked and stuff like that. And then the first time we went, I didn't even share the gospel with him. Like we were just talking and kind of just shared life. And the second time we went, I was like, not that I did it wrong the first time, but I was like, you know what? I think that was good. I want to take another opportunity and see if, again, I was praying about this. Like, God, just give me an open door. Give me something. But I also didn't want to force it, because I know this guy's kind of skittish. Like, he's a skittish guy about the church stuff. He's definitely not a believer. And so he, again, just in the conversation, he had brought up something about he loves science and he loves outer space, and he started talking about some of that stuff and about how dark matter and things that like science can't figure out. And I just felt like that was and I was like, yeah, well, what do you think about it from this perspective? And I just shared a little bit of like an apologetic type thing, just to get his mind going, just strike up a conversation.
Because of the context.
Because of the context,
right.
you know, he brought it up. And so I was like, okay, cool. So let's talk about this. And so it did. And I was like, he thought about that, and he kind of gave his feedback, and I shared. And eventually, probably an hour later, I mean, I had laid out the whole gospel as clearly as I could. He didn't accept it that day, but he heard it.
Right.
And I think it at least gave him food for thought, you know, and it was just a moment of, again, just trying to be intentional to listen to him and think about, okay, how can I, man, just kind of speak his language, be where he is, not try to just, hey, let's sit down and order chicken wings and, hey, let me tell you about Jesus. Maybe he'd heard it, but kind of letting him a little bit lead the conversation. That's what I think Jesus did with the woman at the well. Like he leads her, but he leads her by letting her kind of lead him a little bit in the conversation.
I think we have to
get her to the place where
I think we have to, or you're
Yeah.
going to be throwing darts at a target.
Right.
You don't know where the
Yeah.
target is, and not a target may not be the best way. But I think you have to let them lead the conversation. So my thing is that if I let them lead the conversation, they're skeptical, I'll talk about skepticism. I'm skeptical.
Yeah, for sure.
There's things I still don't understand. I was looking up something the other day. I won't tell you what it is, because y'all won't think I'm a Christian.
Oh, my
anyway, but anyway, I'm skeptical about things. To think that you can figure this whole thing out and this makes sense in entirety, that's illogical. But because we all come someplace saying, I don't understand this, but I'm still going to believe.
Yeah.
And so, if someone's, I find a lot of people have a church hurt. Something happened.
Just thinking about that.
They got a
Yes.
church hurt, and so I'm willing to go there and say that I've been on both sides of it. I've been on the receiving side, and I've been on the giving side as a pastor, and I hate that. And I've tried to make amends for that. But let's just, we've all been part of that. That you can really get hurt if they're intellectual, super intellectual. I'm not. I mean, I'll try my best. I mean,
I'll go there.
Yeah,
Why not? Let's try it.
I think you hit those contexts. I think the most important thing, Kurt, you talked about is just that we listen and we're open, and that they don't feel like we're judging them. Because if they feel like we're judging them, it's over.
Oh, yep.
It's over, and you're going to lose any right to be heard. And this guy that I was talking to that entered into a relationship that wasn't right, and it just so happened that I quit going to the gym for a while, and the person he was with asked him, said, "Do you think Gary's not here because of our situation?"
Wow.
Look, and he told me that, and he said, "No, Gary wouldn't do that." Look, that was a huge win for me, y'all.
Yeah.
Because he knows you.
Yeah, and I thought, man, I would never, I'm not wired that way. But I know he thought he's a pastor. That's why he's not here. Because we all have these summations about people that we make.
Right.
And so anyway, I think just not judging them, and just the conversations of just, if they're open and willing to listen, and you're going to do what you can. And I know Kurt said, we want people, when we share, we have these moments like they're going to, we see the conversions in the Bible. Where's water for me to be baptized?
Save my whole family.
Yeah. It rarely doesn't happen like that. It's usually a long period of time, and so those are the contexts I think about.
You both have said the same thing. I just want to reiterate it too. It's almost impossible to know context without listening first,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah,
if you just
exactly.
come out with like, here's the
Right.
scripture, or here's how God loves you.
Yeah.
I know, like John the Baptist, like there's a place for that. I've used to poke fun at people who would carry the signs around the square or whatever, and repent or whatever. That is
They're
mean,
doing something.
that is something, and some people respond to that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the Lord uses all of it.
I agree. That's a really good point for us to I interrupted.
No, it's fine. It's just
Yeah.
personally, like that's not my style.
It's not me. That's what I was saying, but I'm not against it.
That's right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I was going to say. That there's a lot of different ways this could happen.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be you, the way the Lord's called you. But I think, go ahead. That's what I want to make.
Well,
Yes.
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I think the number one thing they want to see: don't judge me. Right.
Yeah.
First of all, don't write me off before I ever get
Right.
started. The person is probably thinking this, and I want to see real you.
Right.
Like, don't give me churched up
Right.
version that you don't really live. Let me see who you really are. And I'm not saying not be pious. Hopefully, we are
Right.
reverent and obedient to God.
Right.
But like
But we're real human beings.
yeah, if you use ain't and though and whatever though or like what, like if you're, it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. It's more about just be real in the moment. Don't try to doctor it up. Don't use words you don't understand just because
Yeah.
you heard your pastor use them or whatever. Like,
Right.
just be real. Tell your story. Hear their story.
That's it.
Don't
Yeah.
use the word piety. I think
We're
about,
going to keep making that point.
But
Actually, I'm gonna
Paul
check
though
it.
in Athens, right? And this is Acts 17, if you're listening.
Yeah.
Acts 17, where Paul is, he shares the gospel with the Athenians, who were just used to hearing latest ideas. They loved that, right? They'd go to the Areopagus, Mars Hill in Athens. They listened to philosophers, and people bring the latest ideas. So of course, here's a guy, Paul. He's a Jewish Pharisee, now Christian, coming to share with us an idea about this God. Well, what did he do before that? He walked around Athens.
Right.
He walked around looking at all their statues and their idols in the city. So he was getting what? Context the whole
Right.
time.
Yeah.
He was gaining context for, okay, what are these people thinking about? Where, and he's just smart enough in his own, evangelistic techniques that he was like, okay, I'm not going to act like I'm in Jerusalem right now. I'm not talking to these people like they're Old Testament Jews.
Mhm.
I'm talking to them like they're pagan Gentiles worshiping all these different idols, wanting to hear ideas. And so he does.
Mhm.
I
And
got
then
a
he
good
just
one.
shares with
Like,
us.
I got a good one.
He's
Yeah.
like, here's an idea. There's a God that you worship called an unknown God. What if I told you that's actually the God, Jesus, who died for you?
Yeah.
So he just, anyway, it's a master class, right?
Right.
And again,
Right.
I think Jesus at the woman at the well, or so many different stories. Zacchaeus, like there's so many great examples. And for us just to like get over ourselves a little bit, I think that's where the humility comes in. If we are convinced that there's only one way to do it,
Mhm.
if it's I have to carry a cross around, then you're gonna box yourself into that.
That's right. Yeah.
Or if it's I gotta go to the bar, or I gotta go to this, or I gotta whatever, you're gonna box yourself in. I think Paul gives us a great opportunity here to go, man, let's just be really intentional and considerate
Mhm.
about everybody in our lives, and so we can share the gospel in any context.
Yeah, and if you are those two things, intentional and considerate, sometimes I think we think we're going to mess it up. I want to share this with you. You're not going to mess it up.
Nope.
Yeah.
You're not going to mess it up. Like I wonder when Paul went to the temples and they all just said, they wanted to kill him.
Oh,
Did
man.
he walk away
They
going, man,
plugged their ears. They
he walked
shouted
away
at him.
going, man,
didn't
I
do it
stink
right."
at this.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at sharing my faith. Man, I need to, because that's what we think. We think, or
Yes.
I'm going to mess it up, or I don't know what I'm doing. And I would say to embrace that
Mhm.
unknown, to lean into the Holy Spirit, say, Lord, I'd say, Lord, help me. I don't know what I'm doing here,
Mhm.
but I need your help. I'm asking you to help me. Give me words,
Mhm.
and just trust that He's going to work in your life.
That's right. Yeah.
Because too many times we don't say anything because we're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's wrong. That's just wrong.
Yeah, just
We
be
gotta-
honest and be open and be
Yeah.
transparent. If you get it wrong, come back to him and say, look, I told you that wasn't really right.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't say you could steal stuff. He said not to steal stuff.
That was just my story.
Can I give two resources?
Yeah, good.
As we
Yeah,
think
good,
about,
good.
and these are both kind of missionary resources, but evangelism and being a missionary kind of go hand in hand. But listen, we're missionary everywhere we go. I believe that. And if you're in Covington or wherever you go in the world. Two books I was thinking about. One's called Bruchko. It's the story of Bruce Olson. Have you?
Okay. No,
You know
I
this
was
book?
like, I didn't know what word you said.
Okay, Bruchko is what it's called. The book's called Bruchko. It's the story of a guy named Bruce Olson. They called him Bruchko.
Okay.
The Motilone tribes in Venezuela is where he went and he was a missionary. But the story is really about him and his willingness to contextualize his ministry to a people group that he was very different than. He was a California boy, moved down to the Amazon rainforest. Missionaries were known for going down there and trying to Americanize those tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole thing was like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go live with them,
Mm-hmm.
get to know them, and share the gospel with them in a way that they understood. And he did. and it's fascinating. So that's one. And then the other one is the Bruchko,
Bruchko.
Bruchko.
Thank you.
And then the other one is the Diary of David Brainerd. I don't know, have y'all read the Diary of David Brainerd? Jonathan Edwards. He was Jonathan Edwards' almost son-in-law, who is known for being like the inspiration of many, many missionaries, even modern day, because Jonathan Edwards just kind of chronicled his missionary journeys of sharing the gospel with the Native American tribes in Northeast United States. And again, just his story of just being willing to go and share the gospel with people that were very different than him, but to get to know them and do it in a way that was so faithful. Most of the journal is just his prayers. It's like him praying again and again. Long-term ministry of, I'm seeing no fruit, but I'm going to keep praying for these people. And then there were times when he would like read the genealogies of Matthew. Prayer and intentionality, and he just went as God called him to, and he shared the gospel. Anyway, those are two great books to read if you're wanting to be encouraged about sharing your faith.
And there's no perfect way, right? Like we could share the gospel perfectly and someone not accept it. It's not on us to convert someone. It's on us to share the gospel.
Yep, for sure.
Well, then lastly, and this is kind of where we started and we'll end here too, Paul in 1 Corinthians 9:19 says that although he is free, so he has all the freedom that Christ has given him, but he says he's made himself a servant of all, of everyone, to win as many as possible. And so just the question here is, as we wrap up, is just how can we be more like Paul in that mindset of I'm servant to all to just to win some?
Yeah, I think we've kind of talked about it already. I know that, but maybe just to wrap a bow on it, that humility to me, of just not thinking, one, that I'm going to be the one who screws it up. Like, it's all about me saying it the right way. And two, that we don't kind of pigeonhole ourselves into one particular place or time or way or method or whatever of sharing the gospel with somebody. I think that if we can kind of do it with the freedom of a child of God, to go and just share our story and his story, ultimately, God's story, because that's what our stories are. I mean, they're God's stories. And so I think if we just kind of see it that way, I'm free, I'm God's child, I love him, he loves me, and he's given me a gospel to share. I want to go share, I want to tell people about it. It's good news. And so then that sort of frees me up to get out of my head a little bit, I guess, and then just to take the situations as they come. I guess that's sort of Paul's point. I became like, to those not under the law, I became like one not under the law, basically Gentiles, right? To those under the law, Jews, I became like one under the law. You just, if I'm talking to Jews, if I'm talking to Gentiles, if I'm in Athens, if I'm in Jerusalem, I can humble myself to a place to be able to share the gospel.
That's good.
I think very similar, that when he talks about being a servant and all, that if we would think of ourselves as God's servant, that wherever you're at, your work, ball field, kids at school, that one of the reasons you are probably there is so that you can tell them about Jesus Christ.
That's right. Yep.
That they may not ever ask you just off the cuff, but with a little bit of intentionality on your part, you could get them to a place where you have a conversation. And that's what I think he wants to happen. And so I think those things that, man, it's just for you to think yourself that I'm a servant of Christ in this moment, that God wants to use me. He wants to use me on Monday at work or Wednesday night when I'm out with my buds or whatever to draw people to him, to tell them about Jesus. And if you would just think of yourself like that, and really we've said it, but just get over yourself, that they don't want, I'm going to say this, like, they're tired of seeing us. They want to see Christ. They want to hear a different message.
That's good.
Yeah. So
the only thing I would add here is just that the harsh language contrast that he uses, that I would become a slave. My version says, this translation says that I would become a slave to everyone. And when I think about that relationship, if I were a slave to someone, then I owe them, right? Like my job is to do their bidding, to serve them, that word serve. And what are their needs? What are your needs? I want to serve you in whatever context. And so if everyone I come in contact with who's a lost person, and I think of myself as way beneath them. That's the humility part, potentially. I'm way beneath them.
Right.
And what is their greatest need? What do you need right now? The answer to that's Jesus every time, right? Like to the lost person, it's Jesus. And so if I can get that mental picture, like Paul is, I think, imploring us to do, be a slave to that person. And that means if they're, all the different scenarios you mentioned, but if they're at the ball field, then I need to serve them. Like, what do you need in order to come to know Jesus? What do you need? Truth. You need compassion, right? You need grace. What is it that you need? I want to give that to you.
Right.
In the name of Christ, I want to give that to you, and with the power of Christ, give that to you, so that you would be won by His love, mercy.
That's good.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Anyway,
Last thing I'd say is just, I don't know, be willing to start somewhere. I think I have done this kind of, again, just getting in my own head probably too much at times, or just thinking, well, at some other season of my life, I'll be able to do this. And I know not everybody can, go all play. Paul really was very free to be able to go a lot of different places and do a lot of different things. And we're all in different seasons of life, but there's probably some way, and if nothing else, prayer again, starting with that, but there's probably some way in which we can all be intentional to live our lives and use our words to, share Jesus with other people. So
there's an old Stoic philosophy that says, and this is going to connect, I promise. Let's talk about Greece again. No, no one wakes up in the morning and says, "I'm not going to write a symphony," but they do wake up and say, "I'm going to write a symphony, just not today." And it's like, man, I don't think any of us wake up and go, "I'm not sharing the gospel." We probably wake up going, "I'm going to share the gospel, but just not today."
It's probably not today.
Maybe
tomorrow
maybe later.
Better.
Maybe, once I get to know him a little more.
That's a good, yeah.
So,
What if we woke up every day assuming I could very well have an opportunity to share the gospel today, and I'm going to take it?
yeah. Let's live like that.
We
Right.
should.
Like,
I
I'm
think
saying,
we
like,
should.
I want to live like that too. So
let's do that.
anyway, man, thank you guys for digging in here in
Thank
1
you.
Corinthians 9, 10, 14, talking about, sharing our faith. I think this is the last podcast for a little bit, right? We're going to take a break for the summer, and then we'll come back this fall and continue. Obviously, what we're talking about is a messy church, and we are messy people in a messy church, but man, we have a God who has it all together and has given us His Son, Jesus Christ. He has died for our sins, rose, and is now reigning on the throne of grace.
Amen.
So there is a good gospel. There is good news for us to share. So, all right, till the fall.
Yep.
See you then.
See you
Yep.
guys. Thanks.